About 10 years ago, the United Methodist Church began a program to train pastors in church planting and church revitalization. And as part of that training, I was given an official assessment to see if I was cut out to be a church planter. And for this assessment, 3 people sat down in a room with me and asked me a number of theological, psychological, and personal questions. They then wrote up their findings in a 3-page assessment, which was given to me. And, I don't remember much of anything that they wrote, but I've never forgotten one line. It said this, and I quote, "Tim's ideal ministry setting is a church in Hawaii." Now, I've never forgotten this line because it surprised me. I remember telling the folks how much I liked Hawaii, but I don't remember saying anything about it being my ideal ministry setting. So here I am 10 years later, fulfilling the prophecy of this assessment, beginning a new season in my ideal ministry setting. Moving here has been quite an adventure. We're still waiting for our stuff to arrive, so I'm actually, this is a borrowed robe and other clothes that I've purchased here. But, when you move to a new place, as many of you know from experience, you realize how much you don't know, right? You realize how important it is to connect with someone who knows the lay of the land. You realize how good it is to know an expert. For example, Cindy and I didn't know the first thing about banking in America. We've been with Bank of America, banking in Hawaii, I should say. We've been with Bank of America for over 20 years, and we weren't sure in coming here if we should close out our accounts before we moved or after we moved, but while we were in San Diego, someone said there's a woman in the church named Carol. She works at a bank in Kailua. She can help you out. So we connected with her, and we're like, okay, now we know what we need to do. It's good to know an expert. I also didn't know the first thing about aloha shirts. I knew I needed to buy some because I didn't own any, and someone in San Diego had told me, go to Walmart or to the big swap meet at the football stadium. So that was my plan. But on Tuesday night, Deborah Tom set me straight. She suggested that I check out the thrift store here at church, and then she wrote down the name brands of shirts to look for. So the next day, Wednesday morning, I came to the thrift store. I had the, Kahala, Ono, Rain Spooner, etc., right? I had these name brands. And I found 2 Aloha shirts. Nice ones, yes. I am, in fact, wearing one from the thrift store. Tommy Bahama. Yeah. For $5, and I got it for free. So when you live in Hawaii, it's good to know an expert on aloha shirts. But it's even better to know an expert on life. Simon, James, and John are professional fishermen. Most likely they learned this trade as children from their fathers. And they are experts in the field, and successful ones at that, given that they own their own boats. They are not casual weekend fishermen. They are professional small business owners who know fishing inside and out. And when most people are going to sleep, they hit the waters of Lake Gennesaret. And for hours and hours, they drag their nets along the lake, hoping to catch fish. They fish all night, and what do they catch? Absolutely nothing. Not a single fish. Now the sun is up, they've made their morning Starbucks run, and they're cleaning their nets in order to head home for the day. Meanwhile, this guy named Jesus shows up. He's a local carpenter with a knack for teaching. In fact, he's kind of popular, so he's drawn a big crowd. And once Jesus gets done teaching, he does something very dangerous. He tells an expert how to do his job. I mentioned Jesus is a carpenter, right? And Simon is a fisherman. And yet Jesus says to Simon, you know those nets you've already cleaned? Go and drop them in that deep water right over there. When you're trying to get something done and it's not working out, don't you just love it when people tell you what to do? I mean, guys in particular love this kind of advice. You know, if you just don't, talk to the hand, back away, this is my project, I can handle it. It's bad enough when someone tells you what to do. It's even worse when it's the area of your expertise and not theirs. Put yourself in Simon's shoes. What if I, as a pastor, were to walk up to Ed Suzuki, who I know works for the fire department, has done a great job in the parsonage, and I know is working today. But what if I were to walk up to Ed and say, you know, Ed, I just want you to know that I've seen the movie Backdraft 3 times, so I know a thing or two about fires. And, you know, if there's a really big fire, you should tell your guys, just use more water. Just crank up the hose all the way, Ed. That's really going to help your department. You know, or if I were to walk up to Patrick, say, you know, Patrick, I noticed you were making the shave ice on Thursday at the parade, and you know, I lived in Washington State where there's a lot of ice. So this is kind of an area I know, and I think when you're making shave ice, you should wear ski gloves and a ski hat. Just, you know, make the whole experience more authentic. You all would love to receive that kind of advice from me, right? So here in Luke 5, the carpenter from Galilee tells the fisherman from Gennesaret how to fish. Simon responds, Master, we just spent all night fishing and caught nothing. But if you say so, I'll go back out. Don't you wish you could hear the tone of that line, if you say so? Sometimes I tell my wife, all right, if you say so. But I'm not exactly thrilled to be doing what she's asking me to do. In fact, I'm really just doing it in order to prove her wrong. But I'm sure none of you have done that. So regardless of motivation or mindset, Simon actually does what Jesus tells him to do. And what happens? A lot of fish. An absolute extravagant abundance of the stuff. Luke goes to great lengths to describe this catch. It's almost comical. There are so many fish that their nets begin to break. So then they bring in another boat, and there's so many fish that both boats begin to sink with the weight of the fish. The experts spend all night on their own, nothing. Then the experts listen to the advice of a local carpenter, abundance. Makes you wonder, who is the real expert? Sometimes we fish all night and catch nothing. And sometimes Jesus shows up and our nets begin to break. Jesus taught the fishermen a lesson in fishing. He turned an evening of frustration and futility into a morning of awe and abundance. Jesus can do that. In fact, Jesus did that for me. It's how I became a United Methodist pastor. After graduating from seminary in 2001, Cindy and I lived outside of the country for 10 months. And when we returned in April of 2002, I had one goal in mind: find a job. We had no place to live and no source of income, so a job seemed like a pretty good idea. Prior to leaving the U.S., and as I was making my way through seminary, for 4 years I worked at a mortgage bank called IndyMac Bank, which was later taken over by the FDIC in a major bank failure, but that's a different sermon. And while I was there, I worked as a recruiter for the IT, or the computer department. So my job was hiring people. I knew something about that process, and with this expertise of sorts in my back pocket, I set out to find a job. A lot of contacting folks, a lot of follow-up, internet, computer, phone calls, and looking at different types of jobs. And as I was searching for a job, nothing came up. April, no job. May came and went, no job. And I know that the average job search takes months, but when you have no income, no place to live, it gets a little desperate. Now, I wanted to be a pastor, and I already had my Master's of Divinity degree. I wanted to be a United Methodist pastor. But when June came, I knew that window had pretty much closed because in June there's annual conference. And once annual conference happens, there's really no more openings for that year. And I remember telling Cindy that. Well, later in June, I applied for and got a job at IndyMac Bank. It was the one place I didn't want to work. Great people, good pay, familiar surroundings. But for me, it felt like standing still rather than moving forward. So I was offered a job at IndyMac Bank. And that same night, the Los Angeles District Superintendent of the United Methodist Church, who I had never met and had never even heard of, he called me about a job opening in LA. I did the process kind of backwards. But he called me, and the next day we met in person, and 2 days later I was formally introduced as the church's new pastor. And I got to tell you, when I sat down with the district superintendent and talked about this church in LA, it had some of the exact things that I had been praying for. Deep in my heart, I knew this is it. And deep in my heart, I knew that this job didn't come about through my skills. I had fished all night and caught nothing. But it was as if Jesus had gotten in the boat with me and said, now let me show you what I can do. He turned my evening of frustration and futility into a morning of awe and abundance. Jesus can do that. Wouldn't it be great if the story ended here? If the story ended here, it would be so easy to market Jesus. So easy to sell him on Wall Street. So easy to get advertisement dollars flowing in for him. Imagine the possibilities. Is your business in trouble? Looking for a partner who knows how to get things done. Switching to Jesus can earn you 15% or more in 15 minutes or less. If we were Simon, wouldn't we have big plans for Jesus? You know, I was thinking you and I could go into business together. I'll provide the boats, the staff, the equipment. You just point where to fish, and we will split the profits 50-50. See, if the story ended here, each of us would be left with the question, how can Jesus get me where I want to go? We would remain the experts. Jesus would be our assistant. And the fact of the matter is, we're all experts in something. Law, business, teaching, Xbox, surfing, Zumba. More importantly, we are all experts in the one area that matters most, our own life. And for the most part, experts don't like to take advice from others. Forces you to ask the question, who is the real expert? Part of me wishes that the story ended here. Christianity would be a lot safer and cleaner, but part of me is so glad that it doesn't. You see, Jesus doesn't follow Simon and the others. They follow him. They left everything and followed him. That's the punchline. That's the point of the story. They leave everything and follow Jesus. Think about it, that huge catch of fish, they walk away from it. In exchange for what? Jesus. Life as they know it, fish and all, for Jesus. Is that a fair trade? Is that a trade that you and I are willing to make? It's a costly trade, isn't it? Above all, it costs us our expert status in this thing called life. It forces us to consider that maybe Jesus knows more about life than we do. Maybe Jesus is the real expert after all. It's costly, but it has some amazing benefits. Deep, lasting benefits. There's something incredibly attractive about Jesus. These fishermen aren't looking for change. They aren't down and out on their luck. They are successful professionals. And yet they gladly leave the life they've known for life with Jesus. And they do so because they're convinced that life with Jesus is better than life without him. So what does Jesus offer them? Let me just mention two things. The first is belonging, a sense of belonging. Notice how Simon reacts to Jesus after the fish extravaganza. He pushes Jesus away. He tries to cut himself off from Jesus. He says, "Oh, you don't know me. I'm trouble. I'm one messed up dude. Keep your distance." Jesus responds by saying, "I want you to come follow me. No matter how unworthy you feel, I want you to be with me." Simon pushes Jesus away. Jesus draws Simon to himself. Jesus offers Simon a place of belonging, friendship with him and with those who follow him. In a world where many are isolated and lonely, Jesus offers a community in which we belong. And even though our family is so new to Kailua, we've already experienced that community. We've begun to taste that community already, from the folks who greeted us at the airport, to the folks who have been working on the parsonage, from folks who've given us welcome gifts, to folks who've given us the things we need to live in the parsonage now before our stuff arrives. From the great help that Steve Petranek has been to me in this transition, to the great hospitality that Tracy Ng has provided. And I don't even see her, I don't know where she is. But hey, Tracy, putting our family of 4 in her home for 2 weeks. Her cat is happy that we're gone. We just moved over 2,500 miles across the Pacific Ocean. And yet, thanks to Jesus, we already have a community in which we belong. It's good to know an expert. Second, Jesus offers meaning. Notice what he says to Simon. "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." Life with me is about caring for what I care for, and that is people. Life with me is a life of meaning. Jesus offers Simon and the others a very clear sense of purpose. Catch people. Befriend those who have caught nothing and help them taste my abundance. In a world where many wonder what the point of it all is, Jesus offers meaning, a clear sense of purpose. When I first received the phone call to come to KUMC, I was totally caught off guard. A couple of days later, as I was still processing this change, I was driving home and praying, "God, what's going on? I really love our ministry in San Diego. Why are you calling us to Hawaii?" And as I was praying and thinking about this, I turned onto the street where I live, and there was a car sitting in front of our neighbor's house that I'd never seen before and have never seen since, but it had an Aloha bumper sticker on it. So when I parked my car, I went over to check out that car. And on the back window of the car, there was a really big sticker. And I came back to actually write this down, but the car was already gone. But it had a long Hawaiian word on the top of the sticker. And then underneath it in English, it said, "Share the good news of God." And right then, I felt like God was showing me why he called us here. I felt like God was saying, here's the reason for this move: to share the good news of God. What could be more meaningful? If you are looking for a life in which your nets are full of belonging and meaning, then Jesus is for you. Sometimes we fish all night and catch nothing. And sometimes Jesus shows up and our nets begin to break. I'm telling you, it's good to know an expert. Amen?
Amen.